It's about pre-crime. It's about predicting stuff before it happens. And that's what I think a lot of people miss about Palantir. Because a lot of people say about mass surveillance, well, I have nothing to hide. But it's not about if you're doing something wrong now or not. It's about an algorithm thinking if you will do something wrong in the future. Because all of our lives are increasingly online. So if they want something on you, they can just harvest it off through, whether it's, Palantir, it ends up in your Palantir database, basically. It's sucked up by the NSA or GCHQ or any of these other agencies. And you're profiled based on it. Or if there isn't incriminating stuff, they can plant incriminating stuff on your devices.
Imagine a future where you're judged not for what you've done, but for what an algorithm thinks you might do. A future where simply existing online creates a permanent file, tracking your behavior, your relationships, even your private conversations, and feeding it into a system that calculates whether you're safe or a threat. That's not science fiction anymore. According to investigative journalist Whitney Webb, this pre-crime world is no longer an idea from a dystopian movie. It's here, and it's tightening its grip on our daily lives. We've been conditioned to believe surveillance is about catching criminals, that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But Webb warns this misses the point entirely. Modern surveillance isn't about what you're doing right now. It's about predicting what you might do tomorrow. And when the people running those systems decide they want leverage over you, the tools at their disposal go far beyond observation. They can create profiles, distort reality, or even plant evidence on your devices. In that world, innocence doesn't matter. What makes this more dangerous is the scope. Every aspect of our lives is moving online: communication, health, finance, education, even government services. That means everything is harvestable. Everything is trackable, and once inside the databases of companies like Palantir, or intelligence agencies like the NSA and GCHQ, you're just another entry in a sprawling system of control. Webb suggests that the mechanisms of power no longer need middlemen like Jeffrey Epstein to compromise elites. The digital dragnet has made compromise universal. Today, we're diving into Whitney Webb's disturbing revelations about surveillance, privatized intelligence, and the role of tech billionaires in shaping a future of total control. She connects the dots between secretive government programs, corporate power, and blackmail networks in ways that will make you question everything you think you know. Stay with us until the end, because what she reveals next is even more shocking. And before we continue, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below.
I would argue that neoconservatives have very successfully rebranded. And I think Peter Thiel is a very important example of that. So Peter Thiel, as an example, Palantir has been in the news, right? He's a co-founder of that. So how was Palantir created? Well, there was this company that was being run, or not company, sorry. It was a government program after 9/11 called Total Information Awareness. It was housed within the Pentagon's DARPA office. And the man they chose to put in charge of that was John Poindexter, who was the highest ranking member of the Reagan administration to be indicted for his role in Iran-Contra, which, again, the continuity of government stuff is relevant here. So eventually, it launches and whatever, but people are outraged by it because, as they rightly pointed out, it would eliminate constitutional protections of Americans' rights, specifically the right to privacy, among other things. It was a huge surveillance dragnet, and its goal wasn't just to, surveil everything. It was to predict crime before it happens, predict terror attacks before it happens. I mean, it's like Minority Report was basically the end goal of it. And so after all the pushback, they changed the name to Terrorist Information Awareness and try and rebrand. Oh, it's not total. We are still going to surveil innocent Americans, but we're focusing on the terrorists. They did all this stuff to try and rebrand it, but Congress defunded it. But hidden in that bill, Congress allowed aspects of it to continue. And essentially, I argue in my work on Palantir that an effort was made to privatize large aspects of TIA as Palantir. Because when Alex Karp and Peter Thiel were setting it up, they went to John Poindexter through this guy named Richard Pearl, who was a long-standing neocon actor with very extensive ties also to the state of Israel. He was like caught in the 70s giving classified information to Israel's embassy and should have gone to jail and somehow did not. And had a lot of ties also to Netanyahu's first government. And Richard Pearl is the guy that connected Teal Carp to Poindexter, and they basically wanted to talk to Poindexter because they wanted to recreate total information awareness and saw him as the godfather of modern mass surveillance. And in doing so, they basically, Peter Thiel teams up with In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital firm. Alex Karp has said on record that the intended clients of Palantir from the beginning was the CIA. And, the CIA was their first client for their first 6 years as a company. Their top developers went to Langley, Virginia, which is CIA headquarters, every 2 weeks to show the CIA their product and have them tweak it to their liking. And during that period of time, one of the top people at the CIA that would have been involved in that is this guy named Alan Wade, who was also intimately involved with total information awareness. And if you look at how total information awareness was described, its privacy protections, it's exactly the same as the way Palantir sold their stuff later on. So there's an insane amount of overlap. And what's crazy here is that Alan Wade, a few years prior, had created a Homeland Security software program that was also pre-crime-esque and similar to what Palantir ended up doing. It was called Kiliad, and he teamed up with Christine Maxwell to do that. It's about pre-crime. It's about predicting stuff before it happens. And that's what I think a lot of people miss about Palantir, because a lot of people say about mass surveillance, well, I have nothing to hide. But it's not about if you're doing something wrong now or not. It's about an algorithm thinking if you will do something wrong in the future. Well, the problem is that pre-crime has been inching along, and actually a lot of people in Epstein world, obviously Peter Thiel and Epstein had a relationship. More came out about this earlier this year after, Thiel kind of tried to minimize his ties a few months earlier. But Peter Thiel's Founders Fund co-invested in this company with Epstein and Wexner and Ehud Barak called Carbine, that basically had a pre-crime component to it. And Carbine has now colonized an insane amount of 911 emergency call services systems like throughout the U.S. and are the main company at the forefront. If this legislation in the U.S. is passed, it's called Next Generation or NG 911, where they're going to basically federalize and centralize all 911 emergency call systems. And then when you centralize it, you can just put one company in charge. They've changed the board a lot since the Epstein scandal because Ehud Barak was the chair and there were people on the board that were tied to Epstein, including a woman that he allegedly took to the UK to sort of soften up some US senators whose identity is still unknown before the Iraq war vote. But it's a story for another time. And, some other figures tied to Epstein were on the board, and it would formerly been created by veterans of Israeli intelligence. But now they only have one of the Israeli intelligence co-founders on the board. The others have left to do other things. One of them now works for Eric Prince, I believe. And, they've kind of gone their separate ways, and they've tried to rebrand as a more American-looking company, I guess. I think they added Trump's former head of DHS, Christy Nielsen, I think is her name, to the board, and they have Michael Chertoff, the former one of the early heads of DHS under Bush. So
it's like so everything and everyone is captured, and everything is corrupt. Are they really good
I think that's kind of a simplification. I think not everything has always been like that. I think this particular group, once they got their hands on power, it's a faction. They've been consolidating control for a long time. And I think the advent of technology, big tech sort of taking over our lives, has really facilitated that. Because the whole conclusion to my book is that why would you take someone like Epstein down? You don't need people like him anymore to compromise people, because all of our lives are increasingly online. So if they want something on you, they can just harvest it off through, whether it's, Palantir, it ends up in your Palantir database, basically. It's sucked up by the NSA or GCHQ or any of these other agencies. and you're profiled based on it. Or if there isn't incriminating stuff, they can plant incriminating stuff on your devices.
So you're screwed either way.
If they want to screw you, I mean, sure. Yeah. And so it's much easier to consolidate power under those circumstances.
Do you think there are...
And they elevate people who are compromised to positions of power. How did a guy like Dennis Hastert become Speaker of the House of the United States when it was known that he was a pedophile years before getting to that position? Because they can hold it over his head the whole time.
Whitney Webb traces the roots of Palantir back to a Pentagon program called Total Information Awareness. Its goal was chillingly simple: collect as much data as possible, erase constitutional protections, and use algorithms to predict crimes and terror attacks before they happened. Public backlash shut the program down, at least on paper. But Webb argues that its DNA lived on in Palantir, which was nurtured in private hands by Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and their deep ties to the intelligence community. From the very beginning, the CIA was Palantir's primary client, shaping its tools for its own purposes. This is where the story takes a darker turn. Webb connects Palantir not only to government surveillance, but also to figures orbiting Jeffrey Epstein. She points to Epstein's financial entanglements with Thiel's Founders Fund and companies like Carbine, which sought to centralize emergency services with a pre-crime twist. These links suggest that the same networks behind intelligence-backed blackmail operations were also advancing the technological architecture for mass control. In Webb's view, this is not a coincidence, it's continuity.
Do you think there are a lot of Epsteins operated?
Well, yeah, my whole book is about how Epstein was not an anomaly. You know, I mentioned the example of Adnan Khashoggi, but I mentioned Robert Keith Gray, who Robert Maxwell hired when he came, to the U.S. And made his big entry into New York City. He was also involved in sex blackmail stuff. There was a page boy scandal he was related to in the 1980s, where I forget the guy's name. I think Larry Craig was the name of the main congressman or senator involved. And Craig denied all the charges, but then got caught in the early 2000s for soliciting, sex in a bathroom in an airport or something like that. But there's been a ton of these scandals over the years. And then you have figures like Roy Cohn, who I mentioned earlier, involved in sex blackmail activities as well. There's a lot of these figures.
Sex blackmail seems to become very useful.
Well, it is, because, this is one of those things that's a holdover from the mob that later gets absorbed by intelligence agencies because they see its utility.
So if we see someone rich, famous,
knowing knowing information, the sexual blackmail information, the CIA, that's intelligence to them. We want to gather intelligence on these people and then use it to our benefit for national security interests. It's obviously other things too. I understand that my books are like a lot of information, but the thing is, we're never going to get an affidavit from the CIA being like, yes, we did bad things. Like, we've known they've done bad things in various decades. It's been very documented, and they won't admit to bad things there in almost every one of those cases. So it's like, you're not going to get that about Epstein or about anybody else,
So why do you think Epstein became almost like the central figure for all of this corrupt global elite meta cartel?
Well, he's just a microcosm of it, really. But I think
is it his own perversion?
He became too exposed, I think, especially after his first arrest. And as he described it, he became radioactive. But he had, before been able to move through all these different circles, with impunity, and was a well-respected guy in these elite circles, right? He was useful to a lot of people, mainly for money things, but also for, other more illegal things from, what we know about the case as it's developed. So I think since then, I don't know, he tried to rebrand as like a tech entrepreneur and all this stuff, but he was allegedly still cultivating important relationships. He was reportedly advising Tesla on how to take Tesla private. He claimed to be advising Treasury on the Department of Treasury on cryptocurrency and anti-hacking efforts. All sorts of, he was still doing a lot of stuff between those arrests. It's just, the public association was, no longer beneficial for a lot of powerful people.
But he was considered financially illiterate.
By who?
Well, I think Eric Weinstein came out and said he's a moron.
Yeah. That's interesting. Doesn't he work for Teal Capital? Well, Eric, I'm not super familiar with Eric Weinstein's Epstein story, but as I understand it, he talks a lot more about his impressions of Epstein at the meeting as opposed to why he was going there. And I believe he ran a hedge fund at the time. So why would you be going to Epstein as a hedge fund guy? I don't know.
Well, it seems like everybody met with Epstein at one time.
Yeah, for financial stuff. But I do not believe that he was financially illiterate. He was very successful. He would not have been tapped in the 80s by people like Adnan Khashoggi and Douglas Leese if he was not savvy. He helped orchestrate one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history, Towers Financial, but his name got dropped from the case like 3 months in. So, I mean, how do you do that by being financially illiterate? Why would Leslie Wexner give you power of attorney over all of his affairs?
Well, that is also very weird, though.
But would he do that for someone who's financially illiterate? Because Epstein had several years between 1987 or 1985, depending on who you believe, when the introduction was made.
But why give it to him anyway?
Well, obviously, Wexner liked Epstein very much. I think there's no questions there. So there's this murder of Wexner's tax attorney.
Yeah.
And then not long after that, Epstein comes into Wexner's world and untangles his tangled finances, whatever that means. And Epstein during that time, before then, between 1981 and 1985, described himself as a financial bounty hunter. He was hired to find money that had been stolen, and he hid away stolen money for powerful people. He played both sides. And someone who can effectively do that, he was hired by like very fancy, like aristocratic people for those purposes, admittedly. Like a very aristocratic Spanish family being one of them. They would not just hire some financially illiterate idiot to do that kind of stuff for them. And Adnan Khashoggi was one of his clients too. He's not going to hire a financially illiterate guy to do that. I think that is, it's bull, and it's part of this narrative that's been woven about Epstein, about how he was just charismatic and him being good at anything else was just a facade. That narrative inherently means don't look any deeper into what Epstein was doing, in his early history, for example.
What Whitney Webb describes isn't a future possibility. It's a present reality unfolding in plain sight. The language of security, safety, and counterterrorism has become a smokescreen for something much darker: the construction of an infrastructure of permanent suspicion. Imagine living in a society where your freedom doesn't depend on laws, evidence, or due process, but on an opaque algorithm's risk score. That's where we are headed, and according to Webb, in many ways, we're already there. This new order flips the very idea of justice upside down. Instead of innocent until proven guilty, predictive policing makes us all suspects until proven harmless. And when governments and corporations reserve the right to define what harmless looks like, the line between dissent and criminality dissolves. Webb's work makes it clear: these technologies don't just neutralize crime, they neutralize resistance. The most disturbing element is how normalized it's become. Few people question Palantir's contracts with governments. Few blink when emergency systems are quietly centralized under private companies. And fewer still realize that figures like Peter Thiel, with ties to intelligence and Epstein-linked networks, sit at the heart of it all. If the architects of power once relied on secrecy and blackmail, Webb argues, they no longer have to. The digital panopticon does the work for them, sweeping everyone into the net. It raises unsettling questions about the future. What happens when a generation grows up never knowing a world without surveillance? What happens when entire populations accept pre-crime systems as a natural extension of public safety? By the time people realize what's been traded away, the infrastructure will be too embedded, too automated to roll back. Webb's conclusion is chilling but logical. We don't need an Epstein figure anymore, because the system itself has become Epstein, a machine that compromises, controls, and coerces at scale. This is the crossroads we face. Either society pushes back against the quiet expansion of these systems, or we accept a future where freedom is reduced to whatever the algorithm allows. The question isn't whether this technology will shape our lives. It already does. The question is whether enough people will recognize it before it becomes irreversible. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe predictive surveillance is already determining who gets power, who gets silenced, and who gets destroyed? If this breakdown gave you a new perspective, make sure to hit like, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the hidden networks shaping our world.